Hello and welcome to another Doctor Who Big Finish video. In today's Doctor Who Big Finish video, I'll be overviewing the main range for 2018. I will leave a link in the description below to my Big Finish reviewing playlist so you can see last year's main range overview and some of the reviews will feature within this list. So I'm going to be doing things a little bit different to the last year main range overview what I did, because I literally did January to December. But I thought to make it a little bit more interesting, to add a little bit more spice to it, I thought I would do sort of my worst to best main range story, so from number 13 to number 1. So that's the way this video is going to work. Also, I will be doing at the end of this video, which is the best trilogy, which is the trilogy which is worth your buck. So quite a lot of things to cover, so 13 stories and a sort of overview of each trilogy, and obviously which is the best. So you'll find out which is my favourite main range story and which is the best trilogy to buy from 2018's monthly range release. So before I reveal my least favourite story for the main range for 2018, I have to say that this year's main range has been very good. I have to say that it's been more consistent than last year, and I definitely prefer the type of stories told within 2018's main range to last year. So yeah, and I feel like there is only one story which didn't really click with me, but the others I will happily listen to again. Right, so what is my least favourite story for the main range for 2018? And it goes to The Dispossessed by Mark Morris. Now, Mark Morris is a very hit and miss writer. Some stuff you can really love, some other stuff you can think, oh, that was a bit terrible, that. I really like Plague of the Daleks, the last story in the Stockbridge trilogy. So I was kind of thinking, you know what, this story might surprise me. And yeah, it did surprise me in all the wrong reasons. Now, this story itself is very evocative of the 7th Doctor here. That's good, that's a positive. But there is a downside to it being evocative of the 7th Doctor here. It's good if it, sort of harkens back to a golden 7th Doctor story. This one decides to sort of do a Paradise Towers. This story very much reminds me of Paradise Towers, which is not a good thing, because I don't like Paradise Towers that much, because it's the whole idea of this story is based around this sort of sentient block of flats called Helliax. And yeah, I just really couldn't connect with it at all as a story. So yeah, from the outset the story sounds really good, but for me it just never really gelled together, and yeah, it just reminded me of Paradise Towers. So yeah, I'm not that fan of it. So I'm going to give this story a 4 out of 10. It has some really good moments, but just doesn't really do anything for me. Part 1 is just a real... ooh, I just don't like it, I'll be honest. Moving on, at release number 12 is The Kingdom of Lies. Yes, now, I was quite excited for this because it's by Robert Kahn and Tom Selensky, who wrote The Ravelli Conspiracy, a fantastic First Doctor early adventure, and I highly recommend you check that out. So I was thinking, you know what, the 5th Doctor's in safe hands, because, the 5th Doctor is my favourite main range Doctor. He can always deliver a good story. And this, it is a good story, unlike The Dispossessed, where I categorically say, yeah, that was terrible. All the other stories now you're going to see on this list, I actually like, and I will happily re-listen to. So The Kingdom of Lies is a very basic story. It's very much a light-hearted, fun adventure. It's more of a comedy than a serious story, but the plot is, very thin. So I think that, it's good for a new listener, this story, because it doesn't have any complex things going on. But it is a light-hearted adventure, because it's basically about a dysfunctional marriage between a king and a queen who have literally divided their kingdom up on the planet Cardanus. And of course you have the 5th Doctor and Nyssa working with the king, and then you have Adric and Tegan working for the queen. And there's some nice little twists within there involving a certain character, which I'm not going to say. And we get some nice, it's just got filled with some nice little funny moments with the 5th Doctor and Nyssa sort of pretending to be these hired assassins, which is quite funny, seeing Nyssa, who is this really sweet and innocent character, just, saying all these horrible things. So it's quite nice. Well, it's not really a nice thing, but it's quite a funny thing to listen to. But I will say part 4 is where it kind of lets itself down with the whole reveal of the Scorpion, because that's the whole mystery, who is this deadly assassin called the Scorpion. And when the Scorpion is revealed, you're just like, oh, yeah, I remember, because Big Finish did a news article about so-and-so being in this release. So it's kind of anticlimactic, but still, nonetheless, it is a very good story. It's just one of those fun stories. I mean, it did take me a second listen to actually, enjoy this story. but it's still a nice little fun adventure to kick off the main range for 2018. So I'm going to give this story a 7.5 out of 10. So moving on to number 11, and that is Lore of the Nomad. So yeah, this is a monumental release as it says goodbye to the famous sidebar, so it's a kind of an end of an era. But this is a story, it's one of those ones what is really difficult to talk about without spoiling it. I will say when you look at the synopsis you think, okay, this sounds like your real traditional bog standard Doctor Who story set on a spaceship. And you do think that when you're listening to it, but the story kind of unravels and becomes something completely different because it's filled with so many twists and turns and unexpected events, especially when you reach part 3's cliffhanger. You know, everything is kind of blown out the water. Everything what you kind of thought this story was going to do, it just changes the game completely. So that's why I really like it, but it just kind of just flips the tables instantly. And this is the first story to feature the companion called Matthew Sharp. We do get a little flashback to how he sort of came aboard the TARDIS. So yeah, it'd be very interesting, but I do have a little criticism involving Matthew, which I'm not going to say it because it's a bit of a spoiler. But yes, Lore of a Nomad, a story what you think you know, but you really don't. So I think that's the best way to describe it. You think you've heard of this story, but you really haven't. It's like an onion because it's got many layers. Yeah, Lore of a Nomad, I'm going to give an 8 out of 10. Moving on to number 10 now, and that is the Helliax Rift, written by Scott Hancock, the first story in the Unit Trilogy. Obviously, I'll talk about the Unit Trilogy as a whole later on within this video. Now, I had high expectations for this story because it's by Scott Hancock, and he wrote Empire of the Rachnos, which is a brilliant 5th Doctor story, so I thought, you know what, this is going to be great. And you know what, it was pretty good. It was a pretty good story, because this story does have that kind of quintessential British feel to it. It just feels like the android invasion and Spared from Space. It kind of has that type of atmosphere, which is very nice. I do like that. The story itself does have some nice little sort of nitty-gritty moments, especially when you get to the part 2's cliffhanger. And I think that it does set up the unit arc. It sets up the main characters, what you're going to see over the course of this trilogy in the later releases in Are the Cybermen and Warlock's Cross in the form of Blake Harrison. So yeah, I think that it does exactly what it's meant to do, and it's a very good story. Again, I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. At number 9, we have Hunting Ground. I don't have the CD because it hasn't arrived yet, but this story is the last story for the main range for 2018, and I would say it's a very good way to close this year's main range. It's a very odd story because it's just a random 6th Doctor release which is just floating about. It doesn't really have a proper place to go in, because obviously previously in the year we had a 6th Doctor solo trilogy. So you kind of feel like it should be there. I guess you could say the same about Muse of Fire, but that kind of continues the release of 7th Doctor's sort of run. So yeah, it's just weird, but it's just kind of floating about. The story itself is kind of a Scandinavian detective type of drama. So we see the 6th Doctor pair up with a detective trying to solve out what's happened to these missing people. So it just kind of reminds me of The Condemned. If you've listened to that story, the first story in the 6th Doctor and Charlotte Pollard stuff with DCI Menzies, it kind of has that feel to it. Speaking of similarities, this story reminds me very much of Series 11. Think of that what you will, but yeah, at the start of the story we kind of have a little New Year's thing, which is obviously, you know, we've got a New Year's special this year, and the main sort of comparison to Series 11 I draw upon is the woman who fell to Earth, because not only we have the 6th Doctor sort of teaming up with a police sort of slash detective character, we have the villain, and the villain is very much like Tim Shaw in the form of he's basically hunting people for trophies. Instead of taking your tuff, he takes your favourite memory, which is quite a grim idea in a way, isn't it? And also he does freeze his victims to death, much like what Tim Shaw did. So very much a similar thing. Another sort of similarity to Series 11 is that a character loses a family member within this story. So yeah, those are the similarities to Series 11. But yeah, I think as character development goes within this story, it's very good, especially for a character called Yrsa, who is very much of the Doctor's companion within this. And I do enjoy this story because it does have a great sort of little mystery behind it. It does have that classic Doctor Who feel, you know, why are these people going missing and why is this mysterious corporation behind it? So it does feel very authentic Doctor Who when you put it down like that. So yeah, Hunting Ground is a very enjoyable story, and I think the villain's very good. I think this is the second story I've listened to by A.K. Benedict, and it was a surprising adventure because I didn't think that I would enjoy it, but I found myself really enjoying it as a story. So yeah, I'm going to give this story again another 8 out of 10. At number 8 we have the Quantum Possibility Engine, the last story within the Ace and Mel trilogy. Now this story does feel like an end to the Ace and Mel stuff, in the form of this story does sort of go full circle in a way, because it links back to A Life of Crime, the first story which kicked off this trilogy. And to be honest, A Life of Crime, the less said about that the better. It's not a very good story, don't recommend it at all, because it does link back to that with the Spirivol, which was a very interesting idea, very interesting monster, and it kind of links that with Mel having a debt and she needs to pay that off, because in the other 2 stories, in Red Planet and The Dispossessed, you kind of, at the end of those stories, you get a little scene with, you know, Mel sort of plotting against the Doctor in a way. So there is a little mini arc, and this is where it sort of culminates in the form of Mel meeting Dog Bolter. Now Dog Bolter, I think, first appeared in the comics and appeared in the Maltese Penguin. So yeah, this story, in terms of tone, it very much reminds me of an early Big Finish. It does capture the sense of a Gary Russell Big Finish, which is a very good thing, because I love Gary Russell's type of Big Finish, because it's just so experimental and wacky, and this story certainly delivers on the experimental and wacky front, because there's some really wacky characters. There's a droid called Hobbs, who is just, yeah, there are a lot of weird moments and funny moments where you just think, oh, that could really been taken wrong out of context. So yeah, it's got some real nice little funny moments. There's some nice little references to the 7th Doctor defeating sort of some Bandrels. And also we have Narvin from the Gallifrey series within this. And the Quantum Possibility Engine itself is a really good idea. And the way Dog Bolter uses it is very interesting, how he sort of manipulates it to his political advantage, as it were. So yeah, it's got some very interest, especially when you reach part 3. That's when the story starts to become a bit more experimental and tries to do some different things. And I really admire that for it. And it does feel like an end to the 7th Doctor and Ace and Mel stuff. So that's got to be a positive, because let's be honest, I've been pretty vocal about not liking that stuff. So yeah, it's quite a nice way to close it, and the 7th Doctor is really good within this. So I'm going to give this story an 8 out of 10 as well, a strong 8 out of 10. So yes, Quantum Possibility moving Engine. On to number 7, and rather fittingly, we have a 7th Doctor story in the form of Red Planet. Yes, by Una McCormack, the first story in the Ace and Mel trilogy for 2018. And what a brilliant story. It's kind of an alternative timeline thing. It's kind of the Russian version of what Cold It was in a way, with sort of the Cold War. Now the story feels incredibly like something out of season 25, especially when the 7th Doctor is being interrogated. It just feels very classic 7th Doctor, which I really do like. And I will say that the story is very much the 7th Doctor and Mel. Ace is very much doing her own thing. She's very much on her own mission, with this sort of bloke who she meets trying to get over the Berlin Wall. With this sort of secrets and that kind of thing. So it's quite a tense and thrilling way, in that sense that the sort of street keeps changing around her, because obviously time's in sort of a weird flux. But yes, you may expect the Ice Warriors to be within the story. The Ice Warriors sadly don't feature within this story. I was kind of hoping that they kind of kept it as a surprise, but no, the Ice Warriors don't feature within this. But yeah, the one thing I really like about this story is the mystery, the whole mystery about, you know, what's going on, what's on Mars, because we've got the whole sort of Russian sort of space thing going on within it. So yeah, I think that this is a really intriguing story with a great mystery behind it, and I just like the whole espionage feel to this story, you know, very much like an Ambassadors of Death type of story in a way. But yeah, I will say part 3 is when I kind of did lose something. The story did kind of lose an element to me, and I will say that the start of the story, it does feel like it's missing 5 minutes just to be all mysterious in a way. But yeah, other than that, I think that it's a really good solid little story. And again, I'm going to give it number 6 we have a Warlock's Cross. Yes, the last story within the Unit trilogy, and I have to say this is a real good way to close it. I feel like this story is more for the long-term listener. I feel like this is a treat for the long-term Big Finish fan. I feel like if you're just new into Big Finish, you probably won't get the same enjoyment what this story has. I think you probably still can enjoy it, but I don't feel like you have the maximum enjoyment, because obviously this features Klein. Now Klein is one of my favourite companions because I just love the stories she features in. Even the Will Arrowsmith trilogy, which that really needs to be picked up on, because that is a really nice cliffhanger, and I really want to know how the Doctor, Will and Klein get out of it. But less of that, I feel like this is for the long-term listener, because Klein has a very interesting history with the Doctor and a very interesting dynamic with the Doctor. It's not your traditional Doctor-companion dynamic, because obviously of what Klein was or could be, because this story really just sort of give that idea, especially in part 3 we get some little references to Klein's past, with the form of little references, you know, of what Klein could have been. I think it's more of a story for the long-term Big Finish fan to get the idea to realise this is a big thing, because like I said, this story features the TV movie 7th Doctor, which I really do like, because this story does have a sense of finality to it, because this story does have a sort of sense of things ending, and this, you can really perceive that this is very close to the end of the 7th Doctor's life. And I really do like the idea of the TV movie 7th Doctor, the idea that he has battled gods and demons and been the master chess player, and now he's a fallen god and he's a weary traveller and just really tired, and the only challenge he's got left is death. So I think that's why I think the TV movie 7th Doctor in this story is a stroke of genius, because obviously this is the end of the unit trilogy. It wraps everything up, so it does have that sense of finality to it, which I really do like to this story. But I will say though it's a really good way of wrapping up this unit arc, because the unit within this is not the unit what we all know and love, the unit what we saw in the Pertwee era. It's something completely different. And I will say in part 4, it kind of, there's something odd in part 4, like I feel like it's missing something, you know. I felt like I missed something when I was listening to it, but I went back and I listened to it again, I was like, I haven't missed anything. It just feels like it's missing certain scenes within it. But that being said, it has some really beautiful moments, especially in episode 4, with the sort of grand climax of this story with the 7th Doctor talking to this spaceship, which is really quite tragic. And then you sort of get the gut punch with what happens later on at the very end of this story, and it really does make it sense that everything's kind of come full circle with everything. And the whole idea of Warlock's Cross is very interesting. Part 1, you know, is very action packed, and then part 2 is very much sort of meandering around Warlock's Cross, and it's very interesting. It's got some really nice ideas, and I just think that it's a real treat for the long-term Big Finish fan. And I would say that it does wrap up the unit arc, you know, satisfactory. I feel like there are still loose ends within this, where I feel like certain things are left open, so maybe we'll see them return later down the line in other stories. But yeah, as a conclusion, I think that it's pretty satisfying. And as for the creature on this cover, well, I would say it's only got about 2 scenes, but yeah, very good story. I'm going to give this one an 8.5 out of 10. I think that it's a really good story with the whole sense of finality and things coming full circle. So really we've reached the top 5. So at number 5, again, it's a story I don't have on CD yet because it hasn't arrived on the post, and that is the Muse of Fire by Paul Mars. Now, Paul Mars hasn't wrote a main range story for about 2 years, and the last one he wrote was the Lee Massacre, which, if you all know, I love it. It's one of my favourite Big Finish stories. So I had high expectations for this story, and yes, it did deliver. Now Paul Mars as a writer is renowned for comedy and wacky stuff, and this is no exception. This is one of Paul Mars's, you know, wacky, crazy stories. It features the return of Iris Wildthyme and Panda. I personally haven't experienced much of Iris Wildthyme. I've only listened to a couple of things which she's featured in. So I feel like if you're not familiar with Iris Wildthyme as a character, you'll definitely understand it, because in part 3 you kind of get the Doctor sort of explaining to Ace, you know, what Iris Wildthyme is, which is very nice, and it's a very nice sort of dynamic within that. Now the story is set in 1920s Paris, and I think that it's a really beautiful setting. It's just a setting what just sparks your imagination. The whole idea of this story being about creative and art, which is really nice, because it does create some beautiful imagery within your head with the Doctor sort of strolling along Paris with Ace and Hex, and, you know, visiting these various cafes, because the 7th Doctor just wants a holiday, and he's not, you know, manipulating, doesn't know anything, you know, he's just here for a good time. But of course, you know, a holiday with the Doctor never really goes to plan. But there are some really great ideas within this. The whole idea of this map of souls, and the whole idea of the Doctor and Iris Wildthyme trying not to meddle and interfere, but they just can't help themselves, and the Doctor and Iris Wildthyme do sort of spark a war, which you hear in the trailer. I will say part 3 is when the story actually really starts to get going, but I don't think that's a negative, because I really do like the world building, the setup of the characters, and just the whole thing, because you kind of forget about the plot because you're just having so much fun listening to this. There are some really great funny moments when Ace sees Panda for the first time, and it's just absolutely great, full of some wonderful twists, There's a really gory, gruesome moment within this story, and I think that it's a very interesting way of how time's being manipulated, and obviously the way the Doctor and Iris Wildtime interact within this story is very interesting, and it's just a real fun story. I think maybe because it's December and you naturally feel a bit more jolly and happy, it's just a perfect story to listen to right now, because it's just one of those feel good, you know, happy, wacky audios, what you just stick on, just have a lot of fun listening to. So yeah, Muse of Fire, absolutely brilliant. We get some little references to previous encounters with the Doctor and Iris within this, so if you're familiar with the EDA books, then you'll get those little references. And so Muse of Fire, I think that is a wonderful release. Katie Manning does a brilliant job. Yeah, I absolutely love this story, so I'm going to give this story again an 8.5. So at number 4 we have Ghost Walk. Now I absolutely adore this release. This is one what I picked for my favourite spooky 5th Doctor story. It is utterly brilliant. It's a very interesting story because it feels like 4 mini stories will all link into one massive story. It's like an anthology, but it's not an anthology release, if that makes sense. It's very clever how everything sort of weaves together, because each companion gets something to do. Every companion is utilised, and the 5th Doctor is really pushed up against the corner. I feel like that's when you get to see the Doctor really at work, when you see him really, you know, in a tight spot and trying to see him get out of that tight spot. So Beowulf, the villain within this story, is brilliant. It's just really creepy, and just the whole idea that it's sort of set around this ghost walk and how it links to each sort of story within this is very clever. And I just absolutely love it. You know, we get Nyssa being accused of being a witch. Adric nearly gets hanged. Yeah, it's just very interesting and just quite a dark story. There are certain dark moments within this, and it's just brilliant. Yeah, it's a really clever story. If you want to know my full thoughts on this, I have reviewed it. It will be in my Big Finish review playlist down below. It's just a brilliant story, and I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Definitely worth so we've reached the top 3. So at number 3 we have Iron Bright. Yes, I absolutely love this story. Now when I review a box set, I say this, that each box set and each story kind of represents a different flavour of Doctor Who, whether it be historical, sci-fi, you know, whatever, ghost story. This story has it all wrapped in one package. This is one story containing everything. It's historical, it's a ghost story, it's got hard-hitting sci-fi, it's just got everything wrapped up. It's just everything you want from a Doctor Who story and more, because, you know, I feel like this story satisfies every Doctor Who fan, with the first half of the story being sort of a ghost story set in the late Georgian era. So there's your historical and your ghost story, and then we move into part 3 and 4 when it's become a bit more of a hard-hitting sci-fi thing with some really scientific concepts which are really good and interesting. Now the story does have some similarities to The Unquiet Dead, which is fantastic, because The Unquiet Dead was the first story what terrified me as a kid. So anything to bring back that trauma is nice, isn't it? But in the form of, we see the 6th Doctor meet an historical figure in the form of Isambard Kingdom Brunel, which is very in keeping with the 6th Doctor, because obviously Time Lapse we saw him meet up with H.G. Wells, and obviously we've got these sort of ghosts happening, so it does seem very similar to The Unquiet Dead in that sense, that he's teaming up with a historical figure to battle some ghouls. So yeah, very interesting story, and just a real great listen. I feel like this story, like I said, has something for every Doctor Who fan, because it just covers all bases within it. And by the end of this story, you do feel like Isambard should, you know, travel with the 6th Doctor, because I think it'd be a very interesting pairing, and it's interesting to see how Isambard and the Doctor work together, because at the beginning of the story, Isambard's quite reluctant by the Doctor. You know, he's not having any of the Doctor's nonsense, but by the end of it, sort of Isambard softens to the Doctor, and I think that it's very interesting. The story also does share similarities to the Empress of Mars and the idea of these sort of soldiers sort of going to an alien planet and sort of saying, right, this is for the British Empire. So I think that's great. It's kind of a nice little parody of that in a way. But yeah, Iron Bright, like I said, there's something for everyone to enjoy within this story, and it's just a brilliant release. I absolutely love it. So yeah, Iron Bright gets a very strong 9 out of 10. It's a story what you definitely right then moving on to number 2, and that is the Serpent in the Silver Mask. Oh yeah, bit of a shocker. But yeah, I really love this story. I think that it's fantastic. And I'm going to be honest, I had very low expectations for this story. I didn't think I would enjoy this at all. When I looked at the cover, I thought, yeah, this story doesn't appeal to me because it seemed very tonally different when you look at Kingdom of Lies and Ghost Walk. You know, the covers kind of match and blend, whereas this one sticks out like a sore thumb. And it kind of represents the story because the story is loud and brash. If you're new to Big Finish, I definitely recommend The Serpent in the Silver Mask because the story is really simple and easy to follow because it's basically a whodunit, basically a murder mystery. That's the heart of the story. But this story just seems incredibly quick because I know the main range can daunt a lot of people because, you know, it's a 2-hour thing and it's a 4-part story. This just flies by, mainly because this is a really short story because I think the shortest episode within this is 18 minutes, so it just, you know, flies along at a great pace. And the supporting characters within this, the Marcini family, which is all played by one person, is brilliant because they're all flamboyant and lavish characters. And honestly, the person who played the Marcini family, Samuel West, does a brilliant job, you know, to bring each character to life, you know, and why they all look the same but have sort of little tiny differences is just brilliant because it's a great little reveal that is. And the sort of the murder mystery is a great sort of murder mystery within it, and it does feel very authentic to season 19 as well. It's just a real great fun story and it just flies along, maybe because the length of it, you know, it's a very short main range release, but it's just having a lot of fun while it's doing it, and I just really like it. So yeah, if you want to know my full thoughts on The Serpent in the Silver Mask, then check out my review. So yeah, Serpent in the Silver Mask gets a 9 out of 10. It's just a wonderful story. So my number one main range story, and I can't really delay it anymore because it's not really a surprise, and that is Hour of the Cybermen. Yes, this is my favourite main range story for 2018. It is just utterly brilliant. Now, back in 2015, there was a story called We Are the Daleks, which was released, and everybody was praising it and it was saying it was amazing, and rightly so because it was a brilliant story and it was definitely the best story from the main range in 2015. This story is kind of the We Are the Daleks of 2018. It is just superb. I haven't seen a bad review of it. It is just incredible. It is now this story is a big deal for Doctor Who fans because we see David Banks and Mark Hardy reprise their role as the Cyber Leader, Cyber Lieutenant and the Cybermen. Obviously the 80s Cybermen have appeared in the main range in the form of the Reaping, but that wasn't David Banks and Mark Hardy voicing them. And I feel like if this story was voiced, you know, the Cybermen were voiced by Nick Briggs, the story wouldn't have nearly as much attention as it is because, you know, this story, I will say, having David Banks and Mark Hardy just makes it seem incredibly fresh and exciting because it's not Nick Briggs doing the Cybermen, it's something different, and just it makes the story feel more traditional to the Colin Baker era. And speaking of traditional, this story does feel like a missing episode. It does feel like they lost the visuals to this story on the way to when they were going to transmit this episode, and they were just left with the tape. You know, this story just feels incredibly 1980s. The music within this, I feel like the sound designer who did this got the machine, what they did with music back in the 80s for Doctor Who, and he got one of these and did the music on that. So it just feels incredibly like a Sixth Doctor story, and it's one of those stories where you just wish you had the visuals for. And the Cyberman's plan within this is brilliant. What do all humans, you know, need? They need food and water. What happens if you take away water from the humans? They're going to be crawling to be converted to become the Cybermen. So I think that it's a really good idea, and it's just, why hasn't it been done before? Because it just seems so simple when you say it out like that. So Andrew Smith does a wonderful job, and when this story was released back in July, the UK was having a heat wave, and you know, we don't get much sun in the UK, so when the sun is out we do make a big deal about it. So yeah, and there was talks of hosepipe bans. So this story was kind of released at a very convenient time, even though, you know, Big Finish didn't plan this and were trying to take all the water. But yeah, this was just released at the perfect time, and it was just incredibly exciting to hear David Banks go, excellent. It was just amazing, and I love it. It's just a story which I just can't stop listening to. It's just amazing. It's just authentic to the Sixth Doctor era. This story does feel more like a conclusion to the Unit series, because obviously you've got the big bad in the form of the Cybermen and the Unit, so it does feel more like an end to the Unit series. You feel like this should have been the ending for the Unit series. And this story does have a big revelation with Daniel Hopkins, which is the main character you follow through the Unit trilogy. But yeah, this is an amazing story, and I cannot praise it. You know, I just absolutely love it. I just can't stop praising it. It is the We Are the Daleks of 2018. It's just a story I absolutely love her. If you want something incredibly authentic to the 6th Doctor era, look no further. Are the Cybermen is certainly excellent. Moving on to the last part of this video, and that is the trilogy section. So which is the best trilogy for your money? Now I will say I'm just judging this on stories themselves, so which of the stories which you definitely need to check out. So I will say that the 7th Doctor trilogy, again, not a surprise why it's last, because I'm just not a fan of the Ace and Mel stuff. But I will say, if I was judging this as a trilogy, it will be high up, because it actually links together with the whole thing, what's happening with Mel. So yeah, Quantum Possibility Engine and Red Planets are fantastic, but the Dispossessed kind of throws it off a bit. So at number 3 we have the Unit trilogy. Now this would be number 1 because it is the trilogy what links the most. Now I think that it was great that Big Finish kind of spread this trilogy throughout the year, because it showed that time had passed for the Doctor and Unit itself, and I think that it's very interesting to see Unit in a different light, you know, a Unit which isn't too friendly with the Doctor, so I think that's a very interesting and caused a very interesting dynamic. And Daniel Hopkins as a character definitely went through some very interesting stuff, and by the end of it in Warlock's Cross, it's definitely a broken character, he's definitely a broken man, and just some tragic stuff what does happen to him. So I feel like this would be number 1 because it is the story, it is the trilogy what all flows and links together the most. But I'm just judging this on stories itself really. So yeah, Unit trilogy would have been number 1 because it is the one what sort of all flows together and links. But yeah, I think that Are the Cybermen is a brilliant story, like I keep praising, and Warlock's Cross is a great way to close it, and Helliax Rift is a nice way to open it really. At number 2 we have the 5th Doctor trilogy. Now yeah, 5th Doctor always delivers a great trilogy, and this one was no exception. I feel like Kingdom of Lies is either a story you'll like or you'll hate it. It depends how you feel about light-hearted adventures, because it is one of those light-hearted fun adventures, and Ghost Walk is just a really nice creepy story what just cleverly links all together, and Serpent and the Silver Mask is just a lot of fun. It's not light-hearted as Kingdom of Lies because it's a lot more serious, but I just love the whole extravagant characters and just how quick and just how it just flows, and it's just literally one thing to the next. It's just great pacing and just brilliant. So my number 1 trilogy is the 6th Doctor trilogy, containing Lore of the Nomad, Iron Bright and Hour of the Cybermen. Yeah, I suppose you could include Hunting Ground if you wanted, but I'm just going to include those 3 because, you know, trilogy. But yeah, Lore of the Nomad, great story, a story what you think you know but you really don't. And Iron Bright, like I said, it just has everything a Doctor Who fan needs from a Doctor Who story. And Hour of the Cybermen is probably the most 80s Doctor Who Big Finish story you'll probably ever hear. It's just superb, and it's definitely 3 excellent stories there as well. So there we go, that's my main range review for 2018. I hope you have enjoyed it. I'm very tired, I need a cup of tea, and I'll see you in my next video, whichever that will be. So yes, thank you very much, and I'll see you later. So thank you very much, and bye bye.